Okay, so you're out there and you're trying to make ethical choices, support sustainable businesses. But how do we cut through the greenwashing and really tell if a company is truly walking the walk?
Yeah, it's more than just looking for a green label on a product these days, right?
Right, like take that local bakery we were talking about from that Wise Living Now article, remember? Sourcing locally, supporting artists, even donating leftovers to food banks. I mean, are they doing it perfectly? Who knows? But it feels different.
That's corporate social responsibility, or CSR, in action. It's where a company goes beyond chasing profits and acknowledges their responsibility to the planet and the community. It's like they're saying, we're not just here to make a quick buck.
And it's not just some fuzzy feel-good thing either. You see companies weaving it into their brand identity. Look at Patagonia, their 1% for the planet pledge.
Right. They donate 1% of their sales to environmental causes. It's become a huge part of who they are as a company, and it really resonates with their customer base, people who believe in those values.
So you're thinking, great, everyone wins, right? But I can't help but wonder, does that always work? Are there times when these initiatives, even with good intentions, come across as inauthentic or even exploited?
Oh, absolutely. There's always a risk of greenwashing, right? Where a company's actions don't really match their words, like promoting a small recycling program when behind the scenes their core operations are incredibly harmful.
Yeah, putting a Band-Aid on a much bigger problem.
Exactly.
So as consumers, I guess it comes back to how do we cut through the noise? How do we measure the real impact a company's making?
And that's where ESG comes in, environmental, social, and governance factors. While CSR is more about a company's self-imposed ethical standards, ESG provides a framework for actually measuring their performance on those factors.
So it's like CSR sets the intention and ESG measures the impact. Is that sort of a good way to...
You got it. It moves us beyond just stories and good intentions into data and accountability.
So ESG, we're measuring the E, the S, and the G, but what are we actually looking at? What are those metrics?
Okay, so ESG breaks it down, right? Three core pillars: environmental, social, and governance. Each one has its own set of metrics. So environmental, you're looking at a company's carbon footprint, their waste management practices, how they're using resources, water usage, especially these days, how they manage their impact on, like, biodiversity.
It's more than just, are they recycling?
Right. It goes beyond just checking a few boxes. You have to analyze their supply chains, how are they manufacturing their products, all of that. And then you've got the S, the social side. This is about how a company treats its employees.
So we're talking fair wages, safe working conditions,
Yeah.
diversity.
Yes. And it even goes beyond the company itself. It extends to their supply chain.
Hmm.
Are they sourcing materials ethically? Are workers being paid fairly, even down to the raw materials? Then there's their impact on the communities where they operate. Are they contributing positively or actually creating new problems?
Like this ripple effect.
Exactly. And lastly, we have governance, the G. It's often overlooked, but so important.
Governance, yeah. It does seem a bit less exciting than, like, saving the rainforest or fighting for fair trade. So what exactly falls under governance?
Well, governance digs into a company's leadership. Who are they? Board diversity? How do they compensate executives? What about political contributions? Are they being transparent about their lobbying? And this is a big one. Do they have systems in place for whistleblowers? Can employees raise concerns without fear of, retaliation?
So it's about ensuring the systems themselves are ethical and transparent.
You got it. Because even with the best of intentions, if a company's governance is weak, it's going to be more vulnerable. Corruption, ethics breaches, ultimately unsustainable practices.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like building a house. You need that solid foundation or the whole thing's going to fall apart.
Exactly. And just like you wouldn't buy a house without checking the foundation, ESG helps us inspect a company's practices before you invest your money, your time, before you give them your support.
That sounds like a pretty intense evaluation. I mean, how does all this data get collected? Do companies just self-report?
That's a great question, and it gets to one of the challenges with ESG: standardization. There isn't like one universally accepted way to measure and report ESG performance.
So it's a bit of a free-for-all?
In some ways, yes. There are organizations like the Global Reporting Initiative, GRI, and the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, SASB. They offer frameworks and guidelines, but it's not perfect. Not yet.
So for investors, for consumers, it must be tough to really compare companies side by side to make decisions based on all of this.
Oh, absolutely. It can be like comparing apples and oranges. Different ESG rating agencies might use different methods. They might prioritize different things. That can lead to really different scores, even for the same company.
So how do we make sense of this? How can we tell who's really doing the work and who's maybe exaggerating a little?
Ah, now you're asking the right question.
Okay, so how do we crack the code? How do we look at these ESG ratings and figure out what's real and what's just greenwashing?
Well, there's no easy trick, right? But a good place to start is don't just look at the overall score. Dig a little deeper. Look at the data underneath.
Okay, so what are the actual metrics? What are they measuring? How did they get that information?
Exactly. How transparent is the company about their data, about their methodology? And this is where, CSR and ESG, they work together. Remember how we talked about CSR being the story a company tells?
Right, like here are values.
Yeah. Well, ESG data either backs up that story or shows that it's just a story.
Show me, don't tell me.
Exactly. Companies can talk a big game, but those ESG numbers, they tell you if they're actually walking the walk.
And if those two things don't line up, that's a red flag.
Big time. It might be greenwashing, or it might just mean their sustainability. It's not quite there yet. But either way, it's something to pay attention to.
It all comes back to, like, we have to stay informed, do our research. There's just so much information out there, and myth information too, probably.
Absolutely. And remember, every time you buy something, you're making a choice. You're supporting a company and their practices.
Voting with your wallet, right?
Exactly. And the more we understand CSR and ESG, the smarter those choices become. We're not just buying a product, we're supporting like a whole system.
Speaking of which, the Wise Living Now article mentioned Ben and Jerry's. They've always been really vocal about social justice, and it seems like they're really trying to walk the walk on the environmental side, too.
They're a great example of a company that's really integrated their values into both. Their CSR, you see it in their messaging, their activism, but their ESG performance backs it up. Fair trade ingredients, renewable energy, they advocate for climate justice. It's all connected.
So they're proving it can be done,
Yeah.
right? Doing good and doing well, those things aren't mutually exclusive.
They shouldn't be. And what's exciting is consumers are demanding more and companies are realizing sustainability. It's not just the right thing to do. It can be good for business too.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into CSR and ESG, what's the key takeaway? What do we want our listeners to remember?
Remember, these aren't just buzzwords. CSR and ESG give us a really important framework for understanding what a company's impact really is. And yeah, it takes a little effort to really understand it all to make sure you're not being tricked by greenwashing, but that's worth it.
It's about being a conscious consumer,
Mhm.
making informed decisions that match our values, and hopefully they're contributing to a better future.
Exactly. We all have a role to play here. We've got to ask the right questions, hold businesses accountable. And when we do that, we can really start to make a difference.
Love it. So next time you're thinking about buying something, supporting a company, take a second.
Mhm.
Check out their CSR initiatives, see how they're doing on those ESG ratings. The answers, they might surprise you.
They might even inspire you.
That's it for this deep dive. Catch you next time.